Welcome to the Design, Cost-Saving Design and Insurance under NEC Contracts in Hong Kong, Legal and Insurance Insights, co-organized by CIC, NEC Asia Pacific and HKICF. It is our honor to invite Mr. Peter CLAYTON and Mr. Alexander ROSATI to speak for us.
Well, hello again, everybody. We had some technical problems there, I understand. So I guess I should just recap. So apologies to anyone who did hear this the first time. And I think for those who maybe didn't, I should go over it again. So I was starting to talk about the standard approach to design under the NEC3 engineering and construction contract. And the simple provisions that contract provides are Core Clause 21.1. The contractor designs the parts of the works which the works information states he is to design. The second bullet point, the contractor submits the particulars of his design as the works information requires to the employer's project manager for acceptance. And those particulars should be accepted unless the project manager thinks they don't comply with the works information or the law. So you can see there that the works information is a very important document under NEC. It sets out the employer's various requirements and scope and specification and so on for a project, and also it should deal with the extent of the design obligations and any processes required for acceptance of the design. And the final 2 points on that slide: the contractor doesn't proceed with development work until the project manager has accepted the design. So obviously it's a constraint on the progress of construction, and the design can be submitted in parts for acceptance if necessary. We then can understand the NEC to an optional provision that deals with the design standard. Now, those of you who are professional designers, I'm sure will know that generally at common law, designers are obliged to exercise reasonable skill and care when doing design and providing professional services. And provided they've done that and they've at least discharged the level of skill that a typical average member of their profession would, then they won't be liable even if the design proves to be defective in some aspect. However, when contractors take on design, they end up owing absolute obligations, including fitness for purpose obligations, which means that if the design fails or is not fit for purpose, then they're going to be liable even if they did exercise reasonable skill and care putting that design together. So what this option does, when it applies, is it says the contractor is not liable for defects in the works due to his design, so far as he proves that he used reasonable skill and care. And liable for defects, that's a defined term, defects can be, and in broad terms it means not in accordance with the works information. So if you fail to meet a specific requirement in the works information that may be very absolute in nature, under this clause, provided you exercise reasonable skill and care, you won't be held to the higher absolute standard. And there's been at least one case in the UK which has confirmed that this clause works as intended and as I have described. So it's very important for contractors to have it. And then just turning to cost-saving design under the standard NEC3. Now, it doesn't have an express concept of cost-saving design as such, but what it has under the target contracts, that's the options C and D, where the contractor is paid the cost of their works against the target price. They earn pain share or gain share in pre-agreed percentages, depending on where the final cost of that fee entitlement is against the final target. Under those form of contracts, there's this provision. It says if the effect of a compensation event, which would include changes to works information to, for example, reduce scope or reduce cost, if the effect of that is to reduce total defined cost, and the event is change to the works information, then we come to the important words, which I've underlined, other than a change to the works information provided by the employer, which the contractor proposed and the project manager accepted, the prices are reduced. So in other words, Project manager instructs a variation type compensation event which reduces costs, the prices, the target are reduced. But if it's not that scenario, it's where actually the contractor has proposed a change to the works information, and then that's been then accepted by the employer and instructed by the project manager. The prices aren't reduced. So that means the target stays high, but the costs can be saved. And that means the contractor's got an enhanced chance then to earn gain share, whether it's 50-50 or whichever has been agreed in the contract in question. So there is an incentive there for the contractor to make proposals to reduce costs so that they can increase their chance of gain share. And that's part of the incentivisation which NEC target contracts are all about. And of course, both the employer and the contractor benefit from sharing cost savings when they're achieved. What the standard NEC doesn't tell you, though, is, well, how does the contractor make a proposal? Could it just be the contractor saying, well, I think we should save some costs here? I mean, let's say you've got a bridge design and you've got piled and reinforced concrete columns and so on, and the contractor saying, well, I think the piles don't need to be as deep, I think reduce the reinforcements, I think concrete grade maybe not quite so rigorous, and so on. You could just propose that, the employer could go away, ask the project manager to investigate it and instruct it as a compensation event, and arguably it would be triggered by this clause because the contractor proposed it. Or does it mean the contractor needs to actually provide some detail and actually come up with a proposal that shows exactly how cost saving is going to be achieved, and changes the design, and so on? But it's not clear, so there's some flexibility there. And I can see some potential arguments sometimes where the employer, the project manager, or the contractor may each consider that it was their idea originally to come up with this cost-saving proposal. Could potentially get an argument about whether this provision would apply or not. And I guess the key to managing that is good cooperation, good collaboration between the parties. Contractors being clear when they are putting forward proposals intended to save costs. Onto the NEC 4, broadly the same as NEC 3 in these aspects, except that it introduces for the non-target options, options A and B, fixed price contract and remeasurement, for terms, it introduces this regime. So you've got clauses 16.1 and 16.2, all the options which say the contractor may propose to the project manager that the scope, which is the same as works information, it's just new terminology under NEC. The contractor may propose that the scope is changed in order to reduce the amount the client pays the contractor for providing the works, for doing the job. The project manager has 4 weeks to accept that and issue an instruction changing the scope, plus the limitation for the effect of changing the scope, or they may decide not to accept the proposal. And under options A and B, if the effect of the compensation event is to reduce the total defined cost, and the event is to change the scope provided by the client, which the contractor proposed, so it could be a cost-saving design coming out of the clause 16.1 or 16.2 process, the prices are reduced by multiplying the assessed effect of the compensation event by the value engineering percentage. So that's a percentage which will be agreed in the contract data at the outset of the contract. And so if it's 50-50, for example, or 50%, it means that the client and the contractor will share equally in that cost-saving proposal and compensation. For option C and D, the position is the same, which is for NEC, which I just described. So those are the NEC provisions, and I've more or less verbatim set out the 4 provisions there, so you can see there aren't very many. I'm now going to move to the government's of Hong Kong's additional conditions of contract and how they deal with design, cost-saving design. What I'll say at the outset is that the additional conditions I'm going to talk about extend to 30 sides of detailed legal drafting, whereas I think the entire core clauses of the NEC contract are less than 30 sides. So we do have this very style and approach. So what is that approach? Well, additional conditions of contract F1 and F2 deal with design generally, in other words, where contractors do elements of design. Straight away, there are some new definitions. We've got designer, independent checking engineer. They don't really need much explanation, but both the designer and the independent checking engineer must be acceptable to the client. And also, there's a process of providing check certificates for contractor's design, which will obviously provided by the checking engineer. So straight away, there's more control outside there. The contractor's design liability, there are express clauses dealing with this, and it provides the design liability is the same as a professional designer, which would normally be reasonable skill and care, of course, except there's obligations for fitness for purpose in relation to selection of equipment, plant, materials, and goods, which is actually probably okay, because for selecting individual items and materials and so on, there would be obligations that those would be reasonably fit for purpose in themselves. And the government's clause does go on to say otherwise, that there is no obligation to ensure fitness for purpose of design generally, in other words, as a sort of working form. However, and this is really, really important, the contractor shall warrant that the contractor's design and its resultant work conforms to any performance specification or requirement referred to in the contract. So if in the scope or the works information, there are some very specific requirements. So for example, going back to my hypothetical bridge, if there are requirements that shall not deflect by more than X millimetres, that's arguably an absolute obligation. For performance spec, where you could have something that says, I don't know, the air conditioning in a building is not going to deviate outside certain fixed parameters at any time. Those arguably are all absolute requirements or perhaps performance specifications. And what this clause is saying is the contractor shall warrant that this design conforms to those, which I think is an absolute obligation. And there's been a case in the UK, quite recently, just this year, with quite similar sorts of amendments. It's a case relating to refurbishment of Blackpool's trams and a fancy new tram depot building. And it was similar there. There was a general statement that the contractor would exercise reasonable skill and care in preparing its design, but separately there was a warranty of performance specifications and requirements, and that was found to be absolute. So contractors beware. So it's a major potential increase in contractors' liabilities, and obviously to understand those you need to check the scope and the works information in detail. We then carry on with some mechanics. So within a reasonable period before construction, the contractor submits 2 copies of their design, check certificates from the checking engineer, certified working drawings, satisfactory evidence of PI insurance. And then the project manager, within a reasonable period, so not a set period, reasonable period, notifies the contractor whether the documents submitted meet the requirements of this contract. And construction cannot start until then. So clearly there's some things which, in the spirit of NEC, the contractor, the project manager are going to need to collaborate on it to make sure that people are clear what the reasonable period is and that things are going to happen in sufficient time. Everyone's going to have sufficient time to enable construction to proceed smoothly. Because otherwise, what is a reasonable period? Far better if that's pre-discussed and put on an accepted program, for example. Also, it's not entirely clear to me, if you're the project manager administering one of these contracts, what is the obligation on you to check if those various documents there meet the requirements of the contract? Does that just mean you've got to check? There is a check certificate, there are 2 copies, there are certified working drawings, and there is some evidence of insurance. Does that meet the requirements of the contract? Or does the project manager have to dig a bit deeper and say, does the design actually work? Does it meet the requirements of the works information or the scope? In which case there's some checking of potential further liability and obligations. Maybe the answer to that will be in the project manager's own appointments. Maybe that will be clear what they have to do. If not, it's back to there. Continuing on, project manager may require the contractor to correct any non-compliance if the design is spotted at any time without entitlement to compensation. So suffice to say, as normally contracts, the fact that the project manager may have accepted or not objected to the design is not going to change the contractor's obligations or responsibility problems. Also, any change to the works information resulting from acceptance by the employer of the contractor's design shall not be a compensation event, fair enough, and the contractor's design shall be deemed part of the works information provided by the contractor. Yeah, fair enough. Now come to the cost-saving design part of the additional conditions, clauses F3 and F4. So what do we have here? Well, there's a whole set of requirements again for there to be a designer approved by the employer of any, or satisfactory to the employer of any cost-saving design. There's to be an independent checking engineer and check certificates. I guess, of course, that would be the same, exactly the same people to do the underlying design if the contractor is doing some of the design to begin with. But it really ties into a theme, which is that under government's additional conditions, the onus you see is very much on the contractor to provide the detail of any cost-saving design and to own it and take full responsibility for it. So how does it work then in practice? Well, the contractor can at any time submit a cost-saving design proposal, and they must provide justifications with it to show reduction in the prices that result, reduced time for completion if that's on offer, reduced operation and maintenance costs, any efficiency or value to the employer of the works that are to be improved, any enhanced construction productivity, or any other social benefits, which I guess could be wide-ranging. I suppose, going back to our bridge example, if you've got less reinforcement, smaller piles, less concrete, then there's obviously some environmental benefits and social benefits. That perhaps reduce construction traffic demands as well. But you must also provide price schedules and rates, all the adjustments that you'll believe are going to arise from the cost-saving design proposal, and any estimated increase to the operation and maintenance costs. So again, on our bridge example, I'm not an engineer, but let's assume that if you're using concrete of a lower strength and less reinforcement, then maybe there's more risk of some deterioration and some running maintenance on the outer faces of the columns and the concrete and so on. I don't know, but you get the general idea. And then once that proposal goes in, the employer should decide whether to accept that proposal within 6 weeks and assess overall savings, any changes to completion dates and liquidated damages, and agree all that with the contractor. Project manager must also confirm that the cost-saving design is compatible with the works information. And if the proposal is accepted, then there's a somewhat different approach to standard NEC. Generally, although I have seen some slightly different variants of additional conditions on this, but generally the approach is once the cost-saving design is accepted, the prices are immediately reduced, whether that's the lump sum price under option A or a target price under option D or whatever. They're immediately reduced by the total amount of construction saving. But then the construction saving is shared 50-50. The contractor has to account for any increased O&M costs that may arise from the proposal, and also has to pay the project manager's costs of considering and checking their proposal. And the contractor has paid that net upon completion of the works, of the cost-saving designer, the overall works. And the contractor is fully liable for the contractor's saving design, similar to their liability for design generally, which I a moment ago in relation to additional provisions and F2. So that's my overview of design and cost-saving design. Some concluding thoughts. Well, to me, the standard NEC comes across as simple, fair, but it is a little ambiguous. As I say, it's not entirely clear how a contractor is to put in their cost-saving design proposals. It's also not entirely clear who is responsible for it. At the standard NEC, the idea is the contractor makes a proposal, but then there's an instruction project manager to change the works information or whatever, which on the face of it would make the employer responsible for the acceptance of a design proposal. But I suspect in law, that's all going to depend on exactly how a particular proposal comes about. The contractor puts forward a very detailed proposal on standard NEC, and the employer accepts it, but then it fails. The contractor may, I suspect, still carry some liability for that. If the contractor merely says, well, I just think we ought to have a look at reducing the size of the piles, or maybe a bit less reinforcement, they don't do much more than that. Then the employer or the project manager completely investigates it, designs it, checks it, and issues it as a complete solution. Clearly, in that situation, they would have responsibility for it. But overall, I think standard NEC gives very good incentives for contractors to suggest cost-saving design options. By contrast, the Hong Kong version of NEC is complex. It's more onerous for contractors. It's certainly a lot more long-winded in its drafting, about 30 or so pages. But I think overall it's fairly clear who does what, how it happens, where the responsibilities lie. And there are still some good incentives for contractors, but they come with a cost. So you've got to pay project manager's cost of reviewing your proposal if you put one forward. You are going to assume design liability for your proposal, even if it relates to an area of works that you weren't designing originally. And of course, in an extreme situation, cost-saving design could really be a correction of a bad design the employer's design is done in the first place. So why should the contractor pay the cost of the owner checking that, and so on. So I do think the cost-saving design regime, the design regime is not as good for contractors as standard NEC, but hopefully it does still include some good incentives for cost savings and sharing benefits between employers and contractors, which is what NEC is all about. Well, thank you. That concludes my part of the presentation. Obviously, I'll come back later to deal with some questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for an excellent talk on the design under NEC 3, cost-saving design under NEC 3 and NEC 4, and your insight into the Hong Kong government additional conditional contracts. And your concluding thought on the use of NEC. Obviously, as the introduction said, NEC is a baby of Peter's expertise. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to type in the Q&A box. We're going to deal with your question at a given time. For those who have late coming into the webinar box, I would like to remind you, if you want to get your e-certificate, please leave your email address, your name, in the Q&A box with the name with an asterisk as a separate entry. For example, Chen Tai Man, asterisk Chen Tai Man at mc.exchange. So the host will check your name in the Q&A box against the registry name, and then if it's the same, they will send you the e-certificate within the month. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce our second speaker tonight, Mr. Alexander Rosati, talk about insurance under NEC contract. Please.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, TT, and of course, Peter, and everyone on the committee and with this presentation together. Just wanted to say that it's a pleasure to be here. As you've heard, I work for Marsh Hong Kong Limited as an insurance broker. I've also had previous careers as an attorney, also as someone as an insurance claims professional, and also as an insurance underwriter, as an insurance legal and regulatory professional. So I've been in the business for a while, and I've done construction on a number of levels from a number of different angles, and it won't hopefully date myself too much, but I think the first construction project that I worked on from an insurance perspective was the Big Dig in Boston. I've worked underwriting the Freedom Tower in New York City, the Crossrail Tunnel in London, so the Crossrail project, I should call it, and of course any number of large civil engineering and construction projects here in Hong Kong. So I've sort of been around the block, so to speak, and so we'll get to sort of the big question, which I'm sure everybody has, which is in reference to NEC contracts, and particularly the cost-saving design. Is it covered, generally speaking, under a professional indemnity contract of insurance? And the answer is yes, it is. So that's it. I'm done for today, and that's the end of my presentation. No, I'm just kidding. It is not that easy. Nothing is ever that easy, particularly in the world of insurance. Okay? So as an old hand at being a legal advisor, I will tell you that the answer is, of course, that it depends. Okay? So I think what we need to do is first kind of take a step backwards and kind of look at the state of the professional indemnity insurance market, just generally speaking, so that we can kind of understand the issues and the situation right now in the market. And then what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about what the contract, the professional indemnity insurance contract, is designed to cover, because that's the type of policy that we're talking about here. There are many different insurance products that pertain to the construction sphere and to the design sphere and that area. So there's construction all risk policies, there's general liability policies. But the thing that really we're concerned with right now is what's called the professional indemnity insurance contract, which is, just get a little bit ahead of myself here, which is what we're talking about as far as what covers this type of risk, which is the risk of design engineering professionals in reference to their designs given for construction, whether it's under the NEC or frankly under any other contract as well. So let's take a little bit of a look at the state of the market right now. And this is the part where I'm going to scare everyone, because the market is definitely in a state of flux as far as people, insurance companies having issues with underwriting, losses in underwriting book, which is leading to terms being changed, that there's a shrinkage of what's covered under these policies. And of course, at the same time, also premium is going up. So if you look at this sort of chart, which is actually all these charts are based on full year 2018. They're about the same for 2019. I just didn't have any charts, so I'll have to deal with these ones. But essentially speaking, what you can see is if you take out the all other professionals side of this equation, you can see that design and construction rate is a major source of the participation in the market, right, of the entire market of professional indemnity insurance, which includes, as you can see here, lawyers, accountants, technology, and of course the big section there, which is every single other kind of professional that could conceivably be covered under a professional indemnity or PI policy. But as you can see, that big sort of light blue slice of the pie in the upper right-hand corner is quite large. There's a big segment of the PI insurance market is design and construction. So, okay, so yeah, so there's a lot of the market is made up of design and construction. So what does that mean? Well, as far as the risk is concerned for insurers, again, as I said, market is in flux. Right now, what we're seeing is that there is a lot of claims being paid, and premium is low, right? So these, again, are 2018 numbers, but I assure you that right now has not gotten better in 2019 into 2020, right? So as you can see, we're looking at upwards of above 250,000 pounds, and this is out of the London market, which is kind of where most of this lives from a global perspective, in losses, and then in premium, right? It's under 150,000, just above, I should say, pounds, okay? 150 million, sorry, 150 million, 250 million, talking very large numbers, right? So, when the market starts experiencing 100 million pounds of loss, it changes the equation of the market and the market's approach, the insurance market's approach to this risk. So, to make it very, very simple, claims payments going up, premiums still down. The insurance companies have to do something. What are they doing? The answer is they're trying to either get out of the market. Some insurance companies have gotten out of the market. We've also seen increases in premiums. So premiums are going up a lot in certain instances. And of course, the coverage that is offered by these policies is being shrunken down as much as possible. So in real world terms, what does this mean for design professionals, architects, and engineers? It means you're going to pay more for your insurance, and your insurance is going to cover less. Okay? And that trend we expect to continue as the market continues to deal with some large losses over time. Right? So, okay, Alex, you scared me, right? This is all scary. Premiums going up, coverage is going down. What can we do about it? So this leads us to the concept of overall risk, as opposed to what is insured risk, right? So if you're an architect and an engineer, you have risk. You have all sorts of risk, right? You have people who come to the work site, they're employees that might get injured, right? So you need employees' compensation insurance. You might have financial risks. So you might get some type of a special instrument or a line of credit or something that will deal with some of the risks that you have from a financial perspective. So you have design risk. You have risk of counterparty failure. So how do you deal with the fact that the owner of the project might go out of business and not pay you? How do you deal with all these different types of risks, right? So your risk picture is very big and very large. And everything in it is the world of risk for you. There are many different ways to deal with risk. Now, from a standpoint of the risks that we're concerned with here today, we'll sort of take all those other risks and kind of put them on the side. So employee compensation or financial risk or things of that nature, we're going to sort of put them off to the side. Although I will say that from the perspective of Marsh as an insurance broker and I as an insurance professional, we also, as a broker, deal with risk management. We don't just get you an insurance policy. We deal with how to manage your entire risk. So risk can be managed in any different ways. You can control your risk by taking safeguards and precautions in what you do on the work site. You can, of course, transfer some of your risk to an insurance company, which is what insurance is. You're still taking the risk, but you're transferring, right? Or you can finance your own risk and set up, say, your own controlled insurance company, which is called a captive, or finance it some other way. So all of these things are ways to control risk. And risk control or risk management is what Marsh specializes in. But if you are an engineer or an architect, you should be thinking about your risk holistically. You should be thinking about how to control it. And so, again, we're going to put a bunch of the risk on the side. Again, Marsh can help you with all those risks. We're just going to talk about risk of professional indemnity. I think you heard it before because It's sort of set out in the NEC contract itself, and in most contracts, it will say, as long as you use reasonable care for professional under the circumstances, then that meets your standard of liability under most contracts, right? So if you're an architect, you're supposed to use the standard, you're supposed to meet the standard of care and do the things that an architect is supposed to do under similar circumstances, right? So this is sort of the area where your PII policy lives. Okay, so these policies go back a very, very long way. They're quite historical type of products, and they have at their basis the concept that they are designed, right? Just start to look at some of the policy language. They're in fact designed to cover that situation where you have not met the standard of care for a professional under similar circumstances. That's what we call the common law sort of definition of being professionally negligent, right? Want of care for a professional under the circumstances, okay? This is what these insurance policies are designed to, right? So this is the center of the risk for a PII policy. So we'll take a look at some of this language so you can see it. So this is this is what we call the grant of cover under a PII policy. Okay? It covers you for professional liability. Insurer will pay on behalf of an insured all loss resulting from any claim against any insured or civil liability arising from or out of, depending on the contract language. This is one I just happen to pull out. Arising from or out of professional services. So what are professional services? Professional services, as you can see in the definition, is those services performed by an insured under contract, professional design specification. Building engineering, in this particular policy, again, this is one I pulled sort of off the shelf. Right? Supervision of construction, feasibility, technical information, calculation or survey, surveys being performed by a properly qualified person. They do not include supervision by an insured of its own or its subcontractor's workmanship. Such supervision is no different from that which would be expected of an insured and only had workmanship and or management obligation. Also includes duty to warn of defects and professional activities of others. You see someone doing something wrong, okay? You're supposed to report it. Hope you all know that. Okay. So basically what this is saying is this policy will cover you if you do not meet that standard of care for a professional under the circumstances. Okay? So now we know basically what the policy covers, right? So let's talk a little bit about exclusions, because I think this is where NEC and particularly the cost-saving design kind of comes into play. So again, the policy is designed to cover that sort of common law liability of not meeting your standard of care, professional negligence, okay? So what does it not cover? The answer is a whole bunch of things, but, and we're not going to go into tons and tons of details in these policies. Certainly, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out and contact us. We can talk about all of these things in context specifically of your risk, your situation. But contractual liability is written out of this particular policy. Now you say, wait a minute, I have a contract that said, didn't it say contract in the definition? And the answer in the grant of cover, and the answer is yes, it did. But you have to remember that the policy, again, is designed to just cover your professional negligence. So if you have a contract that says a bunch of things other than that, policy will generally try and write those out of cover. So look at the language. Policy will not cover loss in connection with the claim arising out of, based upon, attributable to, super broad language, liability assumed or accepted by an insured under any contract or agreement, or guaranteed or warranty. Okay, so that's pretty broad, right? It's like, well, wait a minute, what the heck does this policy cover? It doesn't cover liability assumed by the contract. The answer is read the rest, right? Except to the extent such liability would have attached to an insured in the absence of such contractual duty, term, or agreement. So again, the policy is saying, we'll only cover you in the contract those things that would normally be part of your liability for being professionally negligent. If you're guaranteeing something else or warrantying something else, it's generally not going to be covered under your policy. And again, this is subject to your particular policy situation and your particular factual situation. Remember, if you're warrantying, say, that you are going to meet a certain time schedule in the contract, we will finish this construction by such and such a date, and you don't, even though you otherwise used good and due care on the situation for a profession. Well, and then you get sued because you didn't meet your warranty to finish the construction by a certain date. It wasn't due to any negligence, it just didn't make it, right? Because it's construction. Construction, it's like a big sloppy thing sometimes, right? You don't meet your deadlines. I mean, who meets all their deadlines in the construction? Yet, Peter will attest to the fact that we've worked on some litigation ourselves that has at its base just that. It's like, construction is not a guaranteed thing, right? There's overruns, there's issues, there's a flood, there's a typhoon, whatever it is, right? But those things that you warrant that are outside of that initial part of professional negligence sometimes are not covered. Another part of this, which is interesting, is cost assessments. Policy doesn't cover loss arising out of any failure by any insured or any other party acting insured to make an accurate pre-assessment of the cost of performing professional services. So a lot of the cost overruns or things that happen in this particular context will not be covered. Again, get back to the same issue, which is, what is this policy designed to cover at its core? That is your professional negligence. Didn't do something that normal, run-of-the-mill engineer or architect is supposed to do, that leads to some sort of bad thing that happens. Well, that's going to be covered, right? But if you warranty sun, moon, and the sky or to meet whatever crazy schedule is, may not be covered. So you do have to be careful about guarantees or warranties. So what does that mean for the NEC contract, and particularly some of the changes that are in this particular document? The answer is, well, taking the first thing that we're all talking about here today, which is the cost-saving design. So a cost-saving design, in and of itself, is not going to change your coverage under the policy. PII is still going to cover you if you make a mistake or a negligence, don't meet your standard of care in doing what you're supposed to be doing under the contract, or whether it's under submitting a cost-saving design, okay? But to the extent that an insurance company or even you would guarantee or warranty something under that cost-saving design, that it will, in fact, lower costs. If you warranty that or guarantee that in any particular way under the documents, right? In this instance, arising out of construction project in and of itself, you're guaranteeing that. But you might be outside of coverage if you don't actually save the cost, right? So again, remember, contractual liability or warranties or issues about what fees might possibly be owed. These are things that are likely outside the grant of cover. You do something wrong and are negligent in your design or in your engineering approach, and that leads to an accident or a collapse or something of that nature happening, but then that's what this is designed to do. This is designed to address that particular circumstance. So you do have to be careful when you look at things from the standpoint of approaching cost-saving design. This, whether it's NEC or any other contract for that matter, or any other situation where you're doing things that changes the initial contract. Careful with the guarantee or warranty situation. So again, we started off by talking about coverage under the policy, but then I said, let's take a step back and talk about risk, whole risk, and how to manage risk. Okay, so assuming that some of this might be outside grant of cover under the policy, what do we do? What do we do to control the risk that some things that happen during cost-saving design proposals and acceptances and things of that nature don't lead to a situation where you are left without cover or left with a situation where you're not controlling the risk? Right? How do you manage the risk? How do you make the risk less? Well, the answer is, it's going to sound fairly stupid. It's going to sound pedestrian. People will probably roll their eyes. Frankly, I'll probably roll my eyes as well. It comes down to the three shuns, as I like to call them, right? Communication, right? What I like to call congregation, or in this instance, we'll call it aggregation, perhaps, because it's design and construction. Aggregation, right? And documentation. So communication. If you are going to make changes to your contract in order to save cost design, for any other reason, right? Or you're going to change the way you're approaching construction project, whether it's method, whether it's a change in materials, or whatever it may be, you communicate that clearly to all the proper parties that are here, whether it's the owner, whether it's contractors above you, whether it's below you, whether it's wherever it is on this project. Make sure that there is communication to everyone as to what the issue is. Then, again, aggregation, right? Let's put everyone in a room and get them to agree. Okay? Let's get consensus. Let's make sure that there is an agreement to the approach that we're doing, an agreement to the change that we are making, right? So if everyone is in agreement, had your communication, you've had your aggregation, as we'll call it here, and then documentation. And I'll tell you, and I'm sure Peter will probably jump up later, he's probably itching to jump up now and say, cases that are won or lost by documentation, that's pretty much everything. Every case is either won or lost, usually by some documentary issue. So if you have the strength of good documentation as to what you're doing, it makes it extremely difficult to lose these types of cases, and it controls that risk. Because again, policy is only designed to do so much. So if you are changing it, if you're making warranties, if you're making guarantees, make sure that you are controlling your risk in some other way. Again, question assist you with that. Okay? So again, there's exclusions, and I'm going to talk about fitness for purpose. It's kind of a different, doing things in a different order here a little bit. But a lot of times policies will not cover any warranties that deal with fitness for purpose, particularly things like defective workmanship materials and things of that nature, although they will if it arises in some type of a context that has to do, again, with that central concept of meeting or not meeting the requirements of the similarly situated design profession. Okay? So in this particular contract, they have exclusions and fitness for purpose. I'm not going to cover you for contract works was not defined, unseen ground conditions, process, collusion is always a write-out, so it's usually not included unless it's very sudden, accidental, and defective in workmanship or materials. So again, sometimes we'll see very broad language on warranties and fitness for purpose warranties or things arising out of this area in these policies, right? So you have to be careful to make sure that your policy is properly tailored for you and as broad as it can be. But again, we're having situations where the market is not as accepting of changes and certainly trying to shrink them as opposed to increasing. So last thing we'll look at is there are extended coverage. So can certain instances get covered with fitness for purpose? This is a good example of one. And again, it says insurance will pay if they have insured rising out of fitness for purpose warranty solely with respect to design and/or specification works, right? Provided that the fitness for purpose warranty is in accordance with practice conventionally accepted as appropriate at the time. in size, scope. Okay. So what this is saying is, even in this instance, they'll say, all right, we will cover you if you guarantee that your design, your whatever it is you're doing, engineering of the site, or you're approaching the construction, is fit for the purpose, but only with respect to the design and specification of the work. So you have to have design and specification of works and fitness for purpose to that specific design. So it can't be general, as I saw from the exclusion before, just general statements on warranty for fitness or purpose may not be covered. So again, as you approach any cost-saving design issues, these are things you have to be concerned with. So again, if you look at this definition, it also has in it a certain concept of what a similar design professional is supposed to be doing at the time, right? So it's accepted as appropriate at the time of the execution of works. So, covered kind of a lot of ground, and see my time is kind of stuck. So, basically what I'll leave you with is let's just say that when approaching these issues of working with the NEC contract, which is an excellent contract, because it in and of itself has a whole lot of clarity, but in approaching it, you do need to remember that it is only designed to meet so many situations, and similarly, the insurance policy, the PII policy, is only designed to meet certain circumstances. It's not designed to meet all circumstances. So when you handle your risk, approach your risk holistically, but understand that certain things only do so much within that particular field. Then the last thing I'll say is, and I think that probably people are kind of wondering, there's a lot of requirements in the NEC policy in reference to what your insurance must have, what you need to present, and what documents you need to have. And frankly, I looked at that two sections, F5 and F6, which I hadn't looked at in a long time, and I said, the answer to how do we handle those two sections the contract is call your broker, because all of those sections are what you present to us in order for us to make sure that we are giving you what you need to meet your risks in this particular situation and to meet your contractual requirements. So give it to us and we will assist with that issue. One thing I will say, sort of conclusion as well, is that as far as the policy is concerned, PII policy, do not need to have a separate PII policy for the change in design itself, although it is in two separate sections in the NEC policy, just to make it clear that your policy must cover both of these things, both the contract and the change in design. But the PII policy, will, if you've got the right broker, will meet all of those requirements of these sections. So again, my takeaway is look at risk holistically. If you are not sure about anything, call an insurance professional, call a legal professional. We can assist you. So I hope I didn't scare you too much. But again, if you have any questions or issues in reference to PII policy or the issues raised tonight, please reach out to us. So I'll turn it back to TT and say thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to taking any questions that you have.
Thank you, Alex, for this really expert advice. For a number of us professionals, we always look at insurance, and I'm not sure which part you find it difficult. I find the most difficult part of looking at the insurance policy is exclusion. Usually 10 times in the number of pages than the coverage. So you really have to look at the exclusion. So Alex talked about a lot of insiders with exclusion. I think you enjoy it very much. So for those who still have questions, please type in the Q&A box. We have a number of questions on the first part. We're dealing with it. So for this Q&A session, we need to do a little bit setting. So prepare out for a while. Okay, may I invite the two speakers to come to the floor?
Not sure where I got stuck in. I'll take the middle. Monkey.
Okay, thank you. Time is very good. Obviously, the talk tonight is very welcome to the audience. We have a lot of questions coming in. A lot of questions. So, in interest of time, I don't think we are able to answer all your questions. So, bear with us. We are only able to pick up a few. So, I'm trying my best to group those related questions together. And I'm surprised there are a common question coming in is COVID-19. A number of questions are related to COVID-19.
Oh my God.
So the first question to Peter is, let me see. First question, very direct. Say a construction site is stopped due to COVID-19. Is it a compensation event?
Yeah. Well, good question. Now, if you are under standard, well, I should say actually, if the construction has been stopped, and that's because the employer has said the site stops or they stop the access, then it's straightforward. You're going to get time and money for that. If you're into the realms of, well, actually, I've got problems with my supply chain, I've got problems with my workers and so on, pace is slowing because of social distancing. Those types of issues are a bit harder. Now, NEC in its standard form has a perfect solution for the contractor because it has a compensation event, things which stop the contractor completing by the completion date, which neither party can vet, and which a reasonable contractor would not have allowed for at tender stage. And I think most people would accept that COVID would fall into that category. Sadly, in Hong Kong, that provision has been amended, and without going into all the details of that amendment, it's probably only going to give time and not money, that particular provision. Indeed, government departments have recognised that already. So you're then back as a contractor looking at the other avenues. You know, has something been imposed on me as a result of has an instruction to do things differently? Is the employer or third parties taking longer to do things, and that's having a knock-on effect on me? You've got to be a bit more inventive and look at the detail of the contract to find a financial claim. So that's my answer.
Yeah, because there are a number of new questions related to COVID-19.
I would also point out from an insurance perspective that most the PII policy is not really designed to contend with COVID-19 related claims. You know, I suppose there could be a situation where you could say, you as design professionals should have thought about this, but it'd be very, very difficult to see such a claim be successful. Some policies, and particularly go forward, have COVID-19 specific exclusions, but obviously there are some that were written previously, particularly on the construction all risk side, that could have some implications, particularly from a business interruption perspective of COVID. But sadly, going forward, probably not.
There are relevant questions. Does NEC has clauses to handle the case of force majeure? Can we argue that COVID-19
Well,
is one of them? Can construction delay due to COVID-19 be considered force majeure? That's hence compensation event?
Yes, well, that's back to that clause I was mentioning in the standard NEC, which NEC doesn't use the term force majeure because that's a bit formalistic and loyally for NEC. Uses this much plainer concept of events which stop the contractor completing by the completion date, neither party could control and so on, which would cover most force majeure situations. As I say, in Hong Kong, it's been amended to remove the money. Having said that, in most traditional contracts that have a force majeure, it tends to only that money.
So their question also said, due to COVID-19, if the transportation of construction material by sea is affected and delayed, which NEC clauses will cover this, and would the main contractor be compensated for extra cost to catch up the delay?
This sounds like deja
What was
vu.
the topic tonight? Well, I think it's well like my first answer. You've got to somehow fit it into some of the other compensation events under NEC. The force majeure type is potentially going to take time. But for money, you're going to have to try and somehow fit it elsewhere. You do sometimes get changed in law provisions in NEC contracts in Hong Kong, so you can see if somehow it fits within a change of law. You know, that was causing impact. The difficulty with that, again, the government members tend to list out the laws which entitle you. You know, if these laws change, you will be entitled to compensation event. Unfortunately, they don't tend to include things like COVID controls. It's things like buildings ordinance, you know, that changes. Get time. So it's a tough situation on it. It requires ingenuity to always say it's the facts of a particular case and see if you can bring it in the contract.
So there's a question for Alex. Also about
COVID.
Can we claim for extra cost for project insurance due to COVID-19 under NEC? Actually,
well, that's not quite.
Do we need to
Yeah.
Top up insurance because of COVID-19? Put it that way.
Yeah. So generally speaking, because the risk that the NEC contract is designed to require you to have coverage for COVID-19 would probably fall outside of those requirements, simply because it's the requirements for the NEC contract you need to show for insurance don't generally include a nod towards problems because of some of a pandemic, right? So the answer is probably no. You would not be able to claim it, generally speaking, not under the requirements of the NEC contract as far as your insurance is concerned. I don't know if there's any implications on the contractual side, whether you have grounds to go back to the owner.
Well, I suppose it is the cost of the insurance, like additional premiums, then you have to look at that. I suppose part of the cost of compensation. I can't remember off the top of my head if you can fit extra premium costs within those cost settings. So it's difficult.
Yeah, it would be difficult to get it back, which is again the reason why from a risk perspective, look at all the risks that you have on these contracts going forward. There are some things out there. There are some products that are expensive right now. Obviously, sort of like parametric cover type things where it'll cover you for a certain type of pandemic events if they're declared by the WHO in certain areas and geographies, and particularly going out there right now for Swiss Re, but they're very expensive. So trying to insure COVID from that perspective is quite expensive. But as far as the NEC is concerned, NEC has its requirements that deal with the PII type risk under the contract, as opposed to sort of first party risk to you because the pandemic interfered with the business. Normally speaking, that would be a requirement under the contract to get as a insurer.
Okay. So many questions before COVID-19. So we change our subjects. I think there will be more COVID-19. So let's see.
And just to say, we are wearing masks when we're not on.
Yeah.
As soon as we're off screen.
Okay. Question is, can the contractor propose a change to the works information which will increase or has no change to the target?
Well, I mean, I guess a contractor can always propose that change is made. If it's going to increase costs, I can't see why there'd be an incentive to increase that. I mean, if there was some other benefits, some other reason why we do that. Quite sure what that question is driving at. It's probably something very specific someone's got in mind.
I mean, I think you would probably, if there's a situation where for safety or design reasons, have to propose a change under the contract that might increase cost, you're still duty bound to do it because that's meeting your standard of care for a professional in the field under similar circumstances. You can't not propose it simply because it increases costs. So I do get worried about that.
Yeah. Good, sir.
Okay. There are a few questions on the Carol sharing. One question said, if the value to the employers is improved, the cost for O&M reduced, but there is no change in terms of the construction costs. In this sense, what is the carrot for the contractor to propose a better design?
Well, yes, I should have mentioned that in my part of the talk. That when, certainly under the government's amendments, contractor can forward a proposal just to reduce their amendments, and then part of that sharing of the savings includes a share of that amendment. So that's the incentive. I imagine it happens quite a bit. So, yeah, the contractor can share it, so they are incentives.
What is the incentive for contractor to submit a cost-saving design with earning less in revenue, but increasing his liability under the Hong Kong government's arrangement of NEC?
Well, that's the trade-off for contractors, isn't it? I mean, you've got to decide, is it worth putting this forward because my saving is 50% or whatever the saving is? And if doing that, you're taking on a design liability otherwise wouldn't happen. Yes, that's a commercial judgment as to whether it's worth taking that risk or not. That is one of, I mean, it's a good example actually of how the government's approach here does reduce the incentives, and that's what I was saying in the final slide. Under the standard NEC, contractors put forward a simple proposal, they don't have to pay for project managers to think about it. The employer decides to run with it, then probably the employer takes full ownership of it and the benefits financial. But clearly, I'm sure would see a benefit taking some risk, making a proposal. It's all backed off with insurance.
Yes, well, it should be. No, it should be. So if again, it's an old advertising campaign for AIG way back in the day, and I did work for AIG. It said the biggest risk is not taking. Okay? So insurance is there designed to help you take risk. Again, if the issue is putting forward a cost-saving design, yes, particularly under the Hong Kong changes, does that sort of increase the possibility that there might be a claim against you because you didn't meet whatever the requirements were? Yes, it is. But again, if that is a failing, that is a claim in professional negligence, you didn't meet the standard you're supposed to meet, should be covered. Right? So you shouldn't be afraid to take risks. You should just be trying to control them, or finance them, and or share them. So it's probably
There's a question. As introduced in the first part, under the Hong Kong government NEC, the CSD has to be checked by a third-party engineering checker and confirmed by the PM. Otherwise, the contractor cannot commence work. Is the contractor relieved from the liability in case a collapse happens? Does PI insurance cover claims?
The fact that a third party has checked and signed off on your design does not necessarily review liability if you also should have known the design was wrong. So in that certain instance, it doesn't insulate you from liability. Again, the policy will address that particular loss. If there is a collapse, and you get sued because they say, well, I know the third party signed off on it. He was negligent, so were you, because you should have known it was bad too. You both should have known it was bad, so I'm suing both. In that instance, the PII, the professional indemnity policy, should step in and cover you, defend you. Does So I hope that answers that.
And follow up. Does PII cover mistakes of contractors' temporary work design? The mistake in temporary work design may or may not cause deficit in permanent.
And the answer is yes, usually it will. So anything that is part and parcel of the entire contract or as part of your duties as a design professional, that's in there, and you don't meet the standard of care for a design professional, and there's a claim brought against you because of it, PII policy should cover.
And as further question, as a design build contractor, do they need to procure additional PII for each proposed CSD? So cover liability or critical purpose?
No, not normal. So as I said before, your PII policy is designed to cover all aspects of what you do as far as a design professional in reference to this client, this project, mostly the client, right? So the other party in the contract. So it's designed to do that. You don't need to get a separate policy every time you have a cost changing design or any change in the overall plan. That being said, we'll say it depends, right? Because if you have a very, very major change in the risk that's caused by some sort of change in design, you might want to go over with your broker and also let the underwriter and insurers know about it, just to let them know that there's been a fundamental change in the size and scope of the project.
Yeah, and could I also add, there could be a situation that's where the contractor had no design responsibility for the original job, then they so then they may not have a policy at all. So.
Yes. So interesting, right? So if during the underwriting process, your policy was limited to certain areas of design, and you expand that, you definitely have to include that as part of the notification, because you would definitely need to let underwriters and let the insurers know about it. But generally speaking, if you are engaged as a normal design professional in a contract, you will not need to get a specific policy for your cost-saving design most of the time. Again, or what I said when I first I said it's covered, right? And I walked away. I said, well, no, it depends, right? So the answer is it depends, and always consult your insurance and your legal professionals anytime you have any type of questions. And yeah, so that's probably the best policy. Honesty is the best policy.
I think this question you might have already answered, but I just read out to see whether you're happy with this. It said, what is your advice on the PII coverage related to contractor design and cost-saving design under the circumstances with the happily amended provision to NEC standard terms through the incorporation of the F5 and F6?
Yeah. So again, the F5 and the F6 is just generally speaking what you need to show, you need to have in place as far as a PII policy in the market. So the F5 and the F6, you can kind of walk through it, kind of fall asleep about halfway through because it's boring. Talk to your insurance professional, talk to your broker. They will provide you to meet your contract. So generally speaking, as I've already said, there's not a special, because there's F5 and there's F6. There's not a special contract cost-saving design, just PII, and as long as it meets the requirements of both sections, you should be good. I think as far as we touched a little bit about the Hong Kong changes. Again, they lead to greater potential for liability, and so you need to make sure that when you are involved in the underwriting process, that all the terms of the contracts are disclosed, that the insurers know the risk they're getting into, so they can't say later, didn't know, right? So as long as you do all those things, your insurance professional gets you a policy which meets all those requirements, you should be okay. Again, the devil's in the details. So use the two of us and you should be okay.
Okay. One question going back to Peter about cost-saving design. Cost-saving design will a proposed instruction under clause 65 option? What would be the best practice to manage a cost-saving design under NEC?
I mean, I think the proposed instruction under clause 65, I think, is for proposed compensation of a to give a proposal for this. So, I mean, that probably would be whether the project manager is suggesting something, and it's just in a position to the cost saving design provisions tend to come the other direction, either through the government's NEC proposal, standard for this use. So I thought normally the cost saving design proposals are going to issue. So, yeah,
Peter and Alex, question is still flooding in. I don't think we can answer all the questions because it's already 8:30. So I decided to be the last questions. Any practical advice both of you would like to give the contractor or tenderer if it is considering to factor in the saving in part in full of the cost saving design in its tender price? Commercial. Your answer. Find it too as the advisor.
That's a good.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on that are, in terms of advice, point number one, there's no guarantee that any cost-saving design you propose is going to be accepted. So I can see, tenderers looking at a job and saying, hang on, we could do this cheap, better, whatever, and then take a risk and sort of bid at cost or even a bit under cost, assuming that you're going to be able to get this cost-saving design through later on. And yeah, you could do that, but it's a risk. And in the sense that it's more something that's better for a situation where you have early contractor involvement, which obviously is possible. But I guess if you're confident enough that the employer is going to see the wisdom of your cost-saving design, it could be a very smart way to win a job. Make a bomb.
And as we said, with risk, as long as you approach it the right way, use the due care that you're the professionals, right? You're the ones who know this business. Make sure you exercise due care in looking at these issues. Then to control your risk, remember the 3 shuns, right? So communication, right? Communicate your issues. Aggregation, get everyone together, get them on the same page. And documentation, document everything.
Thank you. It's wonderful talk. And I wish I have an hour more to continue to chat with a glass of beer.
Yeah.
But in the interest of time, I think we'll end this webinar here. On the screen, you will see a QR code for the evaluation survey. Would you please take some time, give us some feedback so that we can improve next time. The host asking me to give you some sort of advertisement. There is an upcoming Joint Institutes NEC seminar next series. It will be held on the 11th of January 2021. The theme of the next webinar is difference in handling claims between the traditional building contractors in Hong Kong versus the NEC and the beauty of the letter execution. It seems like the topic preamble. Yeah. NEC is a much better way than the traditional building contract. So let's see the argument. You would like to hear the argument between both sides. Please join this seminar. It's already started. The registration has already started, so you check your professional institution. It's online participation. You qualify for 1.5 CPD hours, and it is free of charge. Okay, without further ado, thanks for coming, joining, and attending the webinar tonight, and thanks for the 2 speakers tonight. A wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.